Casino 400 race sheets. How you doing, bro?
I'm good, Jason. How about you, bud?
Oh, man, I can't complain, man. I cannot complain, man. It's a nice Saturday afternoon here in Tampa. So, when I went outside, it wasn't too hot. But I'm sure if I walk out right now, it's pretty hot here. But, of course, you got the race coming up here just in a couple hours. 2 races taking place this week. I was looking over some of the content you had over at Awesemo.com, and one of the pieces that you had where you wrote, much like Pocono in June, we're starting down the barrel of a boring NASCAR DFS weekend. I hate to put it in that bluntly, but Michigan does not produce good racing. It's too big. It's too wide. Drivers are consistently on the throttle. There's no nuisance to this track. That comment definitely stuck out to me. So I guess get off the fence, man. Tell me how you're really feeling.
The good thing, I guess, about Michigan is that really among the NASCAR circuit, there's only one other track just like it, and that's Auto Club Speedway out in California. We've already been there, so we don't have to worry about it. But I mean, I'm sure it wasn't this way I believe in the 70s when Roger Penske had Michigan Speedway built, but it has just become a pretty mundane track. You have a very wide track where you can go 4, even 5 wide, especially going down the front stretch. You can literally stay on the throttle the whole time. The only time you would ever really have to get out of the throttle is if you were having to move around slower traffic. So I mean, it's just a big wide open course where a driver can just mash the gas the whole day. And I mean, like I said, there's really not that much nuance to this track. It really comes down to what's your setup, what are your in race changes that you can make. Hopefully you've got a good pit team, because really the only places that you're going to pick up positions are going to be on pit road or on the initial restarts. Other than that, you are pretty well locked into where you start on the track. And when it comes to racing like that, it's not a good product.
Another thing that you wrote about this race was embrace the pole sitter.
It's a theme that we've been chasing after, and God knows the last couple of weeks it is not worked out for us. But if ever there was going to be a track where the pole sitter could truly take advantage of the clean air, take advantage of the type of track, this would be that track. I highlighted this in the preview, and we can go back to it. If you're an Awesemo Premium subscriber, you go to the NASCAR Slack channel, you find the race sheet, you pull up the laps led page. That shows you the top 2 dominators from each race. So we're talking about 14 races in the lifespan of the Generation 6 car. And if we count the amount of times that the pole sitter was either the top lap leader or led the second most laps, we're talking about 11 races out of 14 instances. The only 3 times it didn't happen, the very first race, so that summer 2013 race, and you could kind of expect that it's the very first time that they've had these brand new cars on the track. Then you go to 2016, it was the driver that started 12th led the most laps, but then the driver that started second led the second most laps. And then in the fall of 2018, the driver that started 3rd led the most laps, and the driver that started 7th led the second most laps. Other than that, it's been smooth sailing for the pole sitter. What makes that very interesting is that we've got a driver on the pole this week who has been on the pole here at Michigan several times and has been a top dominator. So if we're trusting past numbers, past trends, it should be gun-ho with the pole sitter. But there's that little thought in the back of my head saying, what if the new trend is don't trust the pole sitter, because they've been fairly untrustworthy the past couple of weeks.
You mentioned about the premium Slack channel we have. Anyone who wants to fire up a question here for the show, we'll get to those questions first. Then we'll get over to the questions on YouTube. Dave, appreciate you saying hi in the YouTube chat. Of course, be sure to smash that like button here on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to Awesemo, hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell as well. Let you know every time Awesemo's got a show coming up. Of course, this is one of two shows for me today. I'll be back in a couple hours to talk about the UFC card tonight. But, of course, we're here to talk about NASCAR. One other thing before we kind of get into the tiers is kind of your thoughts on the starting positions here. Is there... Obviously, I guess there's going to be obviously certain racers, maybe towards the bottom of the starting field that you're going to look at, their ability to move up, But is there some ones on the draw that kind of intrigue you more than others?
Yeah, we're kind of in a weird spot like we were last week with New Hampshire, where you had a lot of guys that I generally like to plug and play into my cash lineups that were starting a little too far forward for our taste, and it happened again this week. But the catch-22 is that the car that you race today is the car that you have to drive tomorrow in Sunday's race. So it doesn't make sense to be overly aggressive in this race. So I'm kind of anticipating a fairly green race. Now, there will be caution. Somebody will get loose going into a corner and spin out. But generally, we don't have cautions because somebody hit the fence or somebody cut down a tire. This is a track where tire wear, it really isn't anything that we're going to concern ourselves with. So if this track is going to race clean, if this is going to be a smooth race, then those guys that I was kind of hesitant towards in the teams last week, well, I'm kind of embracing them this week.
I guess, obviously we're here to talk about today's race, but what is your thought about your research in terms of tomorrow's race? Is it more of, I got to see how this thing unfolds today before I really start kind of having those general thoughts you have for tomorrow's race?
Yeah, because whoever excels today naturally is going to be the guys that we're going to want exposure to towards tomorrow. Because, if you have a car that runs top 5 because of the inversion, you're going to start positions 16 through 20 tomorrow. So not only are these the guys that have the best cars that are going to be probably the most likely to lead laps later on in the race, these guys are also going to have beneficial place differential in a race that doesn't have that many laps, therefore that many dominator points. So yeah, we're definitely paying attention to what happens today, looking to see who runs the most fastest laps, even though, because this track is so big, fastest laps are going to be kind of spread around. But, we will be able to know who had the best setup and who the best cars were for today, and that will impact our decisions for tomorrow.
Look, I'm not going to try to sit here and proclaim I'm any type of NASCAR expert here. But with having back-to-back races, same racetrack, same weekend, are you more looking at racing teams in terms of your research, in terms of who are you kind of targeting?
Yeah, it's something to definitely keep in mind. Like today, my eyes are definitely on the Penske squad, and including Matty D in the 21, who has the loose affiliation with Penske, because it makes sense. Roger Penske owns this track, so it only makes sense that the team that he owns does so well here. But yeah, I want to keep an eye on race teams in general, like Stewart-Haas, Joe Gibbs, Penske, Hendrick, Childers, what have you, and see if the collective together have come together, put together a race setup, or perhaps just taken somebody else's race setup from that team and said, you know what you're doing works best, so let's just put it on my car and we'll go from there.
Of course, one of the things we like to do here is we break the field down in the tiers. We have it into four different tiers. Tier 1 is the fighters 10K and above. Tier 2 racers in 9K and 8K. I call drivers race fighters. I don't know what, I guess it's just MMA side of me coming out. Tier 3, 7K and 6K, and then of course Tier 4 is 5K and below. Looking at that Tier 1K, the pole sitter is not in Tier 1. He's in Tier 2. But when you look at Tier 1, where it's Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex Jr., Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, kind of, is there one person that I guess Harvick? I know you wrote about Harvick in a piece this week as well, but is there someone in this Tier 1 that you believe will have a little higher ownership than maybe we're projecting? or maybe lower, or maybe their ownership will be a little lower than you think it should be.
Harvick definitely, because we're talking about the driver that's won 2 of the last 3 races here at Michigan, and he could have won a third one, but rain shortened the race, and his teammate Clint Boyer beat him out on pit road, going with 2 tires while everybody else went with 4 tires, and it just so happened to work for Boyer that he stayed out on the lead, and they called the race. But if not for that, when we're talking about Harvick winning 3 of the last 4 races here at Michigan, so I mean, those are such good numbers. But you mentioned my article. I really don't know where Harvick is. I think we have this concept of how good a driver he is currently, based on what he's done recently. But I think it's being masked by a driver who's nailing his setup finally late in the race, getting towards the front and competing for that win. Because when it comes down to dominator points, they're kind of there, but they're not what you would expect from Harvick at this point. It seems like for some reason at this point in the series that it's taking him and Rodney Childers just that little bit extra to get their car set up. Now, perhaps this is the field coming to them because they had such an advantage after we restarted racing at Darlington. Maybe they just had such a huge advantage in pre-race setup, and now everybody else is catching up to them. But regardless, Harvick, we're talking about a driver that's won here 2 of the last three times. I have to ponder Denny Hamlin, because Denny has run really well here. He finished second in the basically what would be this race, because they race in June, they race in August here in the series. So here we are in August in the race. And so basically the last time that they were here at Michigan, Denny ran second, never really led that many laps, but he knocked down a bunch of fastest laps. And that was due to Joe Gibbs always has his drivers kind of set up at Michigan for, in the race with more downforce instead of setting up for qualifying to knock down a faster lap. So he never really kind of got to the lead, but he was definitely running around there. Truex has really, really great numbers here. All of these numbers that I'm gonna reference just for the sake of reference for the rest of the show are not going to include that rain shortened June race from 2018. You add those numbers in there, then you start skewing things. But if you look at the last 5 races here since 2017, Truex has 4 top 6 finishes. The only other thing was a 14th place. He's run really well here. He's averaging 37.4 laps led per race, 30.2 fastest laps. You got to like Harvick. You got to like Truex. You got to like Hamlin. Keselowski, there's something really weird here with Michigan. This is the case for Keselowski. It's the case for Eric Jones, that the hometown Michigan drivers, they really don't do that well here. I don't know if it's them not being able to focus while their family and friends are in the seats, but they really don't do that well here. The best that we can see from Keselowski is a second place finish. But the guy that I really want to focus on here, and the guy that I am trying to jam in all of my lineups, is Ryan Blaney. He doesn't exactly have the numbers that you're looking for. He's got an average finish of 15.6, which out of all of these guys in this tier, that's the worst. But the thing that I'm looking at is that this is the same tire package that Goodyear ran at Las Vegas, at Kentucky, at Texas. Now, when you just isolate those 3 races, I know that's an extremely small data set, but when you isolate those 3 races by themselves, Blaney is averaging 45.7 fastest laps, 62.3 laps led. He's got the best average running position out of everybody in the field at 4.6, the best driver rating at 123.2. He's averaging 73.1 DraftKings points, 66.8 FanDuel points. I mean, everything that you would want to love about a driver, Blaney has it. He just doesn't have the numbers here at Michigan that you would be looking for. So if we're focusing on what have you done for me lately, then Blaney's definitely the guy from this tier that I'm looking to get in my lineups. Plus, starting 11th, he gets me place differential. Even if he doesn't lead quite as many laps, he's got at least 10 points on DraftKings and 5 points on FanDuel that he can get me via place differential, something very valuable in a race that's only going to go 156 laps.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Looking at Truex starting 12th, Blaney at 11th, do you think their value in this top tier is a little better than Hamlin, Keselowski, and Harvick, who are all starting in the top 5?
I think it is, just because of that place differential that they're offering. Like, to tell you that I feel secure in naming who the top 2 dominators are right now, I mean, I'd be lying to you. I mean, you can go to the Awesemo, NASCAR tool, and you can see who Alex has projected as the top projected lap leaders, the top two dominators. But me just looking at these numbers at Michigan, looking at these numbers for the 550 horsepower package, or just looking at the numbers with this tire package, I mean, I can make cases for any of these guys in this tier to be the top lap leader, to lead the second most laps. So when you're left with all of these toss-up decisions, perhaps the best place to go is, like you said, Truex or Blaney, because they simply offer you place differential to help build up that floor.
You mentioned about those tools that Alex has over at Awesemo.com, and this is a great week to take advantage of that weekly pass we have for NASCAR, where you can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for the upcoming NASCAR slate. With the Awesemo Plus NASCAR weekly pass for $9.95, this includes full access to Awesemo's leading driver projections, ownership projections, and the top drivers tool. There's never been a time for NASCAR DFS, so get on the track today. Yeah, you definitely want to check that out. One of the tools that I use is obviously that ownership tool. Looking at Kevin Harvick right now on DraftKings, we have him at 31.8%. Denny Hamlin, 29.8%. So those are things that I'm always looking at in terms of roster construction. I know we talked about last week of putting 2 guys in that tier 1. Is this also a race that like say you're talking to the single entry tournament player? Is this week a week of, okay, try to find 2 guys in this tier 1 and then kind of build around that?
On DraftKings, with 156 laps, I think you can do that, but I can make a strong case for just choosing 1 guy out of this tier, and then building around value, building around the rest of these guys that start a little closer to the front, like we talked about with the higher salaries. Because let's face it, with 156 laps, there's not that many dominator points to go around. So we know we're definitely not going to see 3 dominators in an optimal lineup. It's going to be either one, or it's going to be either 1 or 2, and it's going to be dependent on how many laps that top lap leader gets. If this is kind of split up, then yeah, we're probably looking at 2 from this region. If it's a little heavier, like it was last year when Joey Logano led 163 of 204 laps, then yeah, we're definitely looking at 1. But I think the key for these single entry things is you've got to take advantage of those ownership numbers.
Yeah, no, that's something. Tier 2 is where Joey Logano is at. Of course, 9,700 on DK. Obviously, I mean, you've mentioned about it. You just mentioned about the laps he led the last time. I was just looking at the ownership projections on him. We got him at 23%. Do you kind of feel like, whether you play 1 lineup or 100 lineups, that Joey Logano's got to be a key component?
I've been so in love with the pole sitter, and they keep biting me in the butt. But I mean, I want to embrace Logano as the pole sitter this week because of the track and because of his history at the track. The last time that he sat on the pole was way back in July at Indianapolis, and that didn't work out. I think he led maybe 14 laps, and then he fell back into the mid range. But I think this is just such a combination of his history, his capability, starting on the front row. And something to remember, last year when he led all those 163 laps, he didn't do it from the initial green flag start. He lost that lead on the very first lap to Denny Hamlin, fought back on lap 4, and then went on to just lead a large chunk of laps. So even if Denny doesn't beat Denny, I mean, even if Joey doesn't beat Denny off of the line, I still think that Joey's good enough that he can eventually recapture that, especially if the Joe Gibbs drivers, once again, are built for downforce for long green flag runs versus speed on a short term.
Do you like Logano on FanDuel at 11-4?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. A key component to FanDuel, since this is only 156 laps, we're only talking about 15.6 laps led points. So I think you really just need to focus on a single dominator, single lap leader there on FanDuel. And if you want to go with Logano because of everything that I've mentioned, I mean, 11-4 versus paying up to 13-5 for Hamlin or 14 for Harvick, that saves you a lot of money, and that keeps you from having to go down to the bottom to the Ty Dillons, to the Corey LaJoyes, to the Ryan Preeces. That keeps you from having to go down to those guys that, they're going to start in the 30s, but they probably don't get out of the mid 20s, and that's not gonna help you when so many other guys are going to, like, just say for example, we've got so many guys on FanDuel in that 8 to 10K range that are probably going to be scoring somewhere in the 45 to 50 points today. And if your last guy in is Corey LaJoie or Ty Dillon getting you 20, 25, then that may impact you, and that may be a big enough gap for what you're doing lineup wise to impact you. So when it comes to Logano, answer your question. When it comes to Logano on FanDuel 11-4, I think he makes a good building block. And even if he doesn't lead a large chunk of this race, he's run here so well that I don't think that whatever place differential he may end up losing is going to impact him so negatively versus what he scores in laps led.
When we look in this tier 2, so on and DraftKings prices, we're talking about the drivers in the 9K and 8K range. I want to mention 2 drivers. We talked a lot about last week about Christopher Bell because of starting 35th last week. Now he's starting 29th. 9.9K on DraftKings, 9.5K on FanDuel. And Eric Jones starting 23rd, 8.8K on DraftKings, 10K on FanDuel. Just because they're the only 2 drivers in this tier that are outside of the top 20. What's kind of your take on them heading in this one?
I thought for certain that Christopher Bell's ownership was going to be much higher than it was last week, and it shocked me. I mean, even in cash games, he was only 20% owned. I don't see a reason to go away from Bell. I mean, we had every stat in the book last week. His truck win, his Xfinity wins, the type of track that they were at. I mean, everything lined up for Bell, and he was running in the top 5 for the majority of the day before he cut a tire, got 2 laps down, got those back, was running in the mid-teens, and then cut another tire. So I mean, all of the variance in the world that he could have found, he found it. He found it last week. So now we're moving to a track definitely safer. Bell's history at Michigan, it's so, but outside of Tyler Reddick, generally the Xfinity guys really don't run that well here at Michigan because there's a good amount of Cup drivers that race in the Xfinity race. That negatively impacts their results. But Bell, you've got him starting 29th. He's a little bit cheaper. He's still got tons of place differential. And the thing to keep in mind is as the total amount of laps shrink in these races, it places that much larger impact on place differential. So if you've got a driver in good equipment that we think that we assume is competent, because it came out this week that he's taking Eric Jones's ride next year. So I mean, he's getting promoted to the best ride that he can get at Joe Gibbs. You got this driver, a good day, probably 15 place differential, maybe 20, and at 9,900, I think that makes a lot of sense in cash. we talk about Eric Jones. Eric Jones is always in tournaments, never in cash. His finishes are way too all over the place for you to genuinely trust that you can play him in a cash lineup. You know, last week he was getting really touted as a cash play. Heck, I succumbed to all of the noise in the echo chamber, and I played Jones in cash, and that definitely didn't work out for me. He's all over the place, and the thing that we have to wonder about this week is where is he kind of emotionally? Because the news kind of started to trickle out on Thursday that he was going to lose his ride, and then it gets confirmed later in the day that he is going to lose his ride. Now he and his lawyer, which is acting as his agent, say that he has a ride for next year, and I mean he's a good driver. Surely there's a good amount of teams that would want to put him in their car. But you have to wonder, where is Jones at this point, knowing that he's a lame duck sitting in that car? And he's another Michigan guy, never really run that well here. But the thing that he does have on his side is he does have place differential. 10,000 on FanDuel. I don't think I want to pay that for Eric Jones, but I can make the case for that at 8,800 on DraftKings.
A driver you had mentioned a little earlier was Matt D at 8,400 on DraftKings, starting in the 15th spot.
Yeah. One, we're talking about the Penske correlation. Penske generally runs pretty well here at this track. So you've got a Penske correlate, you've got a Penske affiliated car. But the thing that I'm really looking at is those performances at Las Vegas, at Kentucky, at Texas. If I go back over here and look at these numbers, average start 13th, kind of where he's at today. Average finish 7th. When you look at average finish, that's the 4th best in the field. So we're talking about a guy that seems to race pretty well in this package. You're getting him starting 15th. He's at 8,400. I'm not too sure how the field feels about him, because his ownership kind of seems to move and sway based on the race. And people will, you can go down $200 and you can play William Byron, or you can go up 200 and play Jimmy. You can go up the extra 400 like we talked about and get Eric Jones. So maybe people won't play Matty D because of the position that he's in, because you can get more place differential by going up or down. But based off of this tire package, I really like Matt. Starting 15th, he may not be what you're looking for in cash, but if you play him in cash on DraftKings, I definitely get that. On FanDuel, I do think he's definitely safe for cash. I really like him on SuperDraft, but yeah, he's a guy kind of like Blaney that I'm looking to fit in my lineups if I can.
Is there a preference on what site you like him? I mean, you just mentioned you like him on SuperDraft, but if someone's looking at FanDuel and DraftKings, is there one platform you prefer over the other in GPP?
I think it's FanDuel, just because we're looking at a single dominator build on that site, so you can spend up a little bit extra on these drivers. And in my lineups, it was easier to get to Matty D at 9,300 on FanDuel versus paying 8,400 on DraftKings for Matt. Just to be frank with you all, I am doing nothing but cash on DraftKings this week, and in my DraftKings builds for cash, I couldn't find a way to get to Matty D without doing a double punt build, and that's something I don't want to do for a 156 lap race.
Yeah, no, I get it. In terms of some of the other drivers in this tier 2, you got Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, Amarola, Johnson, Byron, and also Kurt Busch.
Kyle, the only driver out of these 5 races that has a top 10 in every race. Kyle had it's been a funny story with Kyle. Generally in practice, he's had issues talking with his crew chief Adam Alexander about the setup, but once you actually get to the race, then it's like something clicks for him and information starts pouring over through the radio, and they make adjustments on pit road, and he's, he'll find himself fighting for a win, if nothing else, fighting for a top 5. Kyle, I would have really loved to have seen what he did at New Hampshire before he cut that tire on lap 4 and wrecked his car. So, where he's at right now, your guess is as good as mine. What we're probably going to do is, with this whole idea that Kyle needs practice, perhaps the best play is we're not going to go heavy on Kyle today, but if he seems to run good in the final segment, then we will definitely consider him for the race tomorrow, kind of using this idea that Saturday was practice and then Sunday is the actual race.
In terms of, is there anybody else in Tier 2 that you believe people should be looking at?
Chase Elliott has generally run pretty well here at Michigan. His speed has kind of been down the last couple of weeks, but if you're looking just at Michigan track trends and numbers as an indicator of where you want to go, you definitely need to consider Chase starting 8th at 9,300 on DraftKings.
Moving down into Tier 3, because I know we got a couple of questions about some drivers here in Tier 3, and I'm going to start this question from Chase from YouTube. He says, on FanDuel, could you bill with Austin Dillon as your cheapest guy at 7,700? Could be Blaney balance, Logano Blaney balance build.
Oh yeah. We can get into this right now. I really like Austin Dillon. He's been running pretty consistently well. It seems like we talk about Austin every week. I think it's just more or less because we're happy with how consistently well he's been running, and perhaps that's the impact of having Tyler Reddick as a partner on this team versus Daniel Hemrick last year and Ryan Newman the years before. But you look at his numbers. I mean, it was by hook or by crook, but he won at Texas using pit strategy. Other than that, it's been 13th, 14th place finish. Yeah, and when you look at his previous Michigan numbers, there's some top 10s in there, including a 4th place finish. So Austin has run really well here, and if he's your last guy in on FanDuel, that's awesome.
Another question about a driver in this tier, and that's Bubba Wallace. Dakota saying, what do you think about Bubba Wallace starting at 24th and 6,500 on DraftKings?
Okay, let's take apart this. Bubba's in a weird spot. I don't have him highlighted as a cash play right now. Perhaps that could change, but I don't trust Bubba at this track, this wide open format. If this was a plate race, then my mind would be, would definitely be thinking, yeah, Bubba's in play. But here in Michigan, he's been kind of so-so, 27th, 28th, 23rd. The year that he filled in for Eric Almirola when he was hurt, 19th. So I mean, it basically kind of looks like, according to the Michigan numbers, where he starts is where he's going to basically finish. When you look at the 550 horsepower package this year, excluding Indianapolis, excluding the 2 races at Pocono, average finish of 24.6. So I really feel with Bubba, you're probably getting a driver that is going to maybe pick up a couple of spots at the most, maybe move up to 20th, but probably by the end of the race, he's going to fall back to just where he started. And that's not what I'm wanting.
Another question that came in here on the chat, two drivers that are involved in this tier, Austin Dillon, who we were just talking about, and the other one being Tyler Reddick, and being asked about DraftKings GPP in terms of these 2 drivers.
Love Reddick. Absolutely love Reddick. We talked about the Xfinity race last year. Tyler Reddick, I believe he started in the 12th to 14th position, ended up winning the race. This track, it suits Reddick to a T. Reddick loves a big, wide open track with high banks where he can, use his willingness to ride the rails to gain the extra speed that's up there. That's what happened at Homestead, where he had a top 5 finish, hung around the top 5 for the majority of the day. Finished second at Texas in this tire package. Now, once again, that was by pit road strategy, but the fact was that he got up there and he was able to stay up there and keep Joey Logano, Kyle Busch, those Kevin Harvick, those drivers behind him. Starting 14th, it's going to keep people off of him because, there's not that much place differential, but we're getting him at a little bit of a discount this week at 7,200. He's a driver that I genuinely believe could find his way into the top 5 because, this track really suits the kind of style that he loves to put out there on the track.
Two names we talked about last week, Nemechek and Sternhouse Jr., 31st and 32nd here.
Woo! Okay. John Hunter was working great until he didn't. And if you're new to NASCAR DFS, there's a reason why John Hunter Nemechek is called John Hunter Nemechek. He genuinely finds his way into the wall or into other people. And I was sitting on my living room floor watching the race, and when he wrecked out, I slammed my fist on the ground. I said, "He did it! I knew it! I knew it! I knew he would do it." And my wife looked at me like an idiot and said, "Who did what?" And I said, "He wrecked." I told everybody he would wreck, and he finally wrecked. If you watch the truck race Friday night, what happened to John Hunter Nemechek? He wrecked out. I mean, it just seems like the logical conclusion for this poor kid is that he will get loose in a corner going way faster than he should, and he's going to get loose and he's going to go turning. Once again, the place differential isn't that great. It's 31st, and I can go down $1,000 or more here on DraftKings and get more place differential from drivers that I actually kind of trust. This is John's first race in the Cup Series at Michigan. When you look at what he's done in this package so far, average finish of 32.5. So, your hopes for place differential for him, they're probably not there. When it comes to Ricky, Ricky had a good race last week after all of those DNFs. Yeah, his numbers in a better car at Roush Fenway, 28th, 19th, 18th, 18th, 8th. This should be the sort of track, just like Reddick, that really should suit him because he loves to hug the wall and ride around, but they really haven't kind of been there for him. Starting 32nd, like if you're in this area and you need someone to fill out a cash team and you're deciding between Nemechek and Stenhouse, go with Stenhouse, but actually the better play might be going down $200 and actually playing Cole Custer.
Why do you like Cole so much?
Cole has been running really, really well of late. Like if I go back here and look at his recent numbers, 8th at New Hampshire last week. Of course, we're not going to try to say that a 1 mile track to a 2 mile high banked oval are correlated, but just the fact, finished 8th there last week. Then you go 7th at Kansas, wrecked out 39th at Texas, but then 1st at Kentucky, 5th at Indy, and then the 16th and the 7th at Pocono. I think just that he's really hit a consistency stride. Starting 16th, that's going to scare people off for cash, but this is, if there's a drum that I'm going to bang today, it's don't be afraid to move your player pool for cash further and further up the starting grid. Don't just say, I got to have guys 20th or worse to add to my dominators. Don't be afraid to look at guys like Custer, like Austin Dillon, like Tyler, even Tyler Reddick, just because of his upside. I think that the consistency is there. Cole's another guy that likes to ride around the rim. He was a guy that always did really well at Homestead in the Xfinity Series. So yeah, I am willing to take half as much place differential from Cole Custer versus Ricky Stenhouse just for the sake of knowing that I might actually sneak out a top 10 out of Custer versus Stenhouse, who probably finishes 24th, 23rd.
Going back to Tyler Reddick, we mentioned about his price on DK of 7,200, 8,000 on FanDuel. Is that salary got you intrigued?
Yeah, that definitely makes things work because, by all means, he should be a little more expensive on FanDuel. So 8,000, that's a discount compared to where he should be. Now, the one problem that I do have with Reddick is that 1.3 flex multiplier on SuperDraft. 1.95, you can play him as a champion pick. Like if you're throwing a bunch of lineups together, that makes sense, that 1.95. But with just a 1.3 multiplier as a flex play on SuperDraft, there's just not a lot there to really capitalize on his day, because we're talking about Reddick having a 1.3 multiplier versus Logano, who has a 1.2, and I know who's a whole lot more likely to lead laps.
Yeah. You mentioned about there's drivers that are starting behind Nemechek that you like, as opposed to him.
Right.
Is Daniel Suarez one of those drivers?
Suarez, the story always is with Suarez. If this race gets kind of wrecky, then he'll keep himself clean and he'll move up and he'll gain spots. If you want to pay $6,000 on DraftKings, $3,500 for him on FanDuel, that's way too stinking cheap, because he's $500 more than the rest of these punt plays, like Timmy Hill through Quinn Houff, all of those guys that are going to finish laps down. Suarez is only $500 more than them. So I mean, if you're going with a weird, really top heavy lineup, then Suarez makes sense as the last guy in, but I would really kind of advise against going that way on FanDuel. 6,000 on DraftKings, you're getting 10, probably maybe 12 place differential. And if I'm totally wrong and this turns into just being a wreck fest, then Suarez could easily sneak out 17 spots for you at $6,000. That sounds good. I think, though, I would look at either Priest, Dillon, or LaJoy for your cash game picks as that last guy in. And in the article, I put down LaJoy simply because he's the cheapest and he has the most place differential to gain. But if you've got the extra money and you want to spend up for Ty Dillon instead of Corey LaJoy, or you just want to split the difference and play, one lineup with one cash lineup with Ty Dillon and one cash lineup with Corey LaJoy, hedge life, I'm not going to fault you for that either. They both probably have a similar floor and a similar ceiling, but maybe you get something a little extra. Last year in this race, Ty Dillon found his way to 11th. So I mean, that's stranger things have happened.
Dakota also asked. He's the one who asked about the Bubba question. He goes, one last question for me that goes off the Bubba one is Chris, who's starting in 22nd, 6,300 on DK, a good switch off with Bubba starting 22nd at 6,300.
Okay. Buescher, when he was racing for JTG Doherty, he really, as you would say, he outkicked his coverage. He did surprisingly well for a mid-tier car. His finishes were 14th, 16th, 20th, and 6th. So I mean, this guy really excelled in this car, in a worse car, honestly, than what he's driving now. So you put him in better equipment, starting 22nd. Like if you didn't want to play Custer because you think he's starting too far forward, you didn't play Bubba because you don't trust him, and you don't want to go down to the guys in the 5,000s because you don't want to leave yourself with $700, $800, or even $900 left over in a lineup. Yeah, Chris Buescher, you're taking him out of that equipment, you're putting him in a better car. I mean, you could easily see another top 15 finish out of him today.
Of course, this is a NASCAR DFS strategy show. I want to let you know about the fantasy football package we have over at Awesemo.com, as we are excited to bring you our inaugural season-long fantasy football and best ball draft kit. Using the same tools that have helped make Alex Awesemo Baker the #1 daily fantasy sports player, we have compiled a package that will revolutionize the way you prepare for fantasy football drafts. For only $29.95, our draft kit includes everything you need to prep, including rankings, projections, sleeper tools, loads of content from our experts, and I love this, and it's just probably because of the name, the Draft Wingman, which will update team projections in real time based on who you've already drafted. And as an added bonus, new FFPC members get a $35 credit when they sign up for an Awesemo draft kit, which basically makes it free. Don't miss this one. Dominate your fantasy and best ball leagues today. Also, while you're over there at Awesemo.com, you got to check out all the great NASCAR coverage we have over there. And, of course, you can get that weekly pass for $9.95 to get all these great tools that Alex uses daily. So when you're looking for to come up with that best lineup possible, you got to take advantage over there at Awesemo.com/join. Let's break down this last tier. So this is the the under 6K drivers and below. You mentioned about LaJoie here a moment ago. Is there somebody here in this low tier option that jumps off the page at you?
Genuinely, the lowest I would go out of all of these guys would be Corey LaJoie at 5,600. And to be frank, you really shouldn't be building a lineup that requires you to go below 5,000. Like if you are compiling drivers and you find yourself, oh crap, I got to pick between Garrett Smithley and Brennan Poole or JJ Yaley or this Australian bloke or Quinn Houff, who do I go with? If you're doing that, I think you've made a process decision that was bad, and you need to start deleting drivers and starting over again. The thing that makes these drivers relevant to lineups is laps and attrition. Well, we have a lack of laps. There's only 156 laps, and I don't think this is going to be an attrition race. And especially for these guys. These guys can't afford to go out there and wreck their best car and then have to roll off the backup, which isn't going to be near as good for tomorrow's race. The only saving grace that they have is next week we're going down to Daytona to race at the road course. So it's going to be a different type of car, a different type of horsepower package. So, I mean, if they do wreck twice this weekend, it's not the end of the world for these guys. But considering the amount of money that's invested into these cars, it very well could be the end of the world for them. I mean, it's kind of slowly trickling in day by day, but a lot of these single car teams, these underfunded teams, they are having trouble staying above water. So these guys are destined to just ride around in the back, finish the race 10, 12 laps down, and try to keep themselves clean so that they can race tomorrow. And I don't anticipate any sort of circumstances in today's race that's going to, move them up into the 20s, keep them onto the lead lap. So yeah, the last guy that I would honestly look at for DraftKings is Corey LaJoie, Ty Dillon, Ryan Preece. It was good to see Preece run as well as he did last week. If you just want to look at what these drivers have done in this package so far this year, Dillon and LaJoie are kind of basically the same driver. They're both starting around 24th, 25th. Actually, no, the exact same starting position, 27.6 in these 9 races, finishing in the 23rd position, and their average running position is 24th to 26th. So, in actuality, they're probably both the same driver. So, flip a coin.
This is what I take what you just said there. So I need to go in the Fantasy Cruncher, and I need to eliminate all these drivers out of a Fantasy Crunch.
Yep, because Fantasy Crunch, that's something very, very, very wise you're hitting on there. Because if you leave these drivers in there, and enough of these top tier guys like Harvick, Hamlin, Logano, Blaney, whoever have enough points, you may get that random crunch that gives you 3 of these guys up at the top, and then throws in a Quinn Houff at 4,500 in order to fit in, whoever else. You are kneecapping yourself.
Let's get a couple of questions in here. Dan had asked, says, does playing Logano and Hamlin in the same lineup on DraftKings make sense?
Definitely. That seems like it seems like the safest way to go in cash because you feel like you are locking in at least one of the top lap leaders. Ever since the draw on Thursday, I've kind of felt like either Logano, Hamlin, or Harvick were going to be one of the top lap leaders. So if you give yourself Hamlin and Blaney, not Hamlin, Blaney, Hamlin and Logano, it feels like you're really locking yourself at least into one of the top lap leaders, if not both of them. In these 14 races at Michigan in the Generation 6 car, 3 times it's been both the pole sitter and the driver starting second who have combined to lead the most laps. So it's a scenario that we could see again.
Another question that we got over this is from R. Stanley over on YouTube. He goes, Blaney, Logano, Pierce, and Cash. Do you agree with this?
Yeah. Logano, of course, for the obvious reasons. Blaney because of the place differential, and he has a very high likelihood to get to the lead and lead laps, and then your last guy in is just your place differential.
Chase says on FanDuel, is it too risky to do 3 expensive guys with a combo such as Pierce Suarez, or round it out? Worried the points won't score as much as finish position in a more balanced lineup.
Yeah, on FanDuel, you just don't have enough laps led points to make that a viable construction. Like if this were a Bristol, a Martinsville, or a Richmond race where there's 400, 500 laps, then yeah, that build is very in play. But with only 156 laps, I don't think that type of lineup construction is going to end up being optimal. You are looking at 1, maybe at the max 2, and we're talking like your second. If you're considering a second dominator on FanDuel, it's a guy that has to have place differential to help build up that floor.
Rod says, do you like any particular dominator group?
If you were going to say, okay, like I'm looking just for two guys in the majority of my lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel to base my dominators around, I keep finding myself falling back on the combination of Logano and Blaney. And I mean, what these guys do today, it's either gonna sink my ship or I'm gonna be pretty happy this afternoon. But those are the 2 guys that I keep falling back upon. But honestly, I mean, I can make a case for going Logano, Hamlin, Logano, Harvick, Blaney, Logano, Harvick, Hamlin, or just going Logano, just going Harvick, just going Blaney. It is really wide open, and I think today will be a really good indicator of what to expect for tomorrow.
Yeah, just looking at our ownership projections right now, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., this over on FanDuel, 30% at 6.4K. I wanted to look up Kevin Harvick. Of course, he's 14,000 on FanDuel, the most expensive driver there is. He's at 20% ownership.
Yeah, and remember, just what you need from Harvick at 14K on FanDuel, you need him to really dominate this race to pay that off. I mean, with only 15.6 laps led points available on FanDuel, you need him to knock off at least 100 or so laps led. And I mean, that's not the kind of race that we've seen from Harvick. In these last 5 races here at Michigan since 2017, he's only averaging 29 laps led per race.
Be sure to smash that YouTube like button right here. Also, make sure you subscribe to Awesemo. Hit that notification bell so you know exactly when there's an Awesemo show that is taking place. We'll get a couple more questions here before we get out of here for this edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show. Stanley says, so 2 dominators and 4 place differentials sound right?
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to spend up for your first place differential driver being Christopher Bell, it totally works this week.
Ben says, what about Corey LaJoie as a bottom pick?
Yeah. I mean, if that's your last guy in, whether on Yeah, I don't think you need to go that low on FanDuel at 4,000, but on DraftKings, if he's your last guy in at 5,600, then I think you've made the right decision.
For a newer NASCAR DFS player, what should they be looking for today to help them out tomorrow?
Do your best to pay attention what happens on these restarts. Who really can pick off positions on the restarts, but probably the most important thing is gonna be who has the ability to maneuver their way through traffic and get their way to the front, because that's probably going to be the best indicator of who we're looking for tomorrow. I mean, green flag restarts, they can be kind of fluky. It can boil down to if you've got a good push behind you, what the drivers beside you are doing. You can benefit a lot from just happenstance on restarts, but the ability to drive through traffic and get your way to the front, that's a real indicator of just how good your car is. So that's something we definitely want to pay attention to for tomorrow.
JT asking Christopher Bell place differential versus Joey Logano as a possible dominator.
Crap, just play them both. That's the simple answer. Just play them both. But because I mean, Logano at 9,700, we're getting him at a discount, and Bell's price is what it is, and that's probably the way it's going to continue to be for the rest of the season. But if you're having to make a 1 versus 1 decision, I'm going to say Logano over Bell because of just what I anticipate Logano to do with Dominator points today.
Of course, got a busy day here on Awesemo.com. Of course, be sure to be looking out later on today. We've got the UFC Live Before Lock. That'll be at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. MLB Live Before Lock coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, I'll be a part of the UFC show with Pete Rogers Jr., so be sure to check us out. Be sure to hit that like button here on YouTube. Does help us out. Phil, anything else you want to kind of mention here before we get out of here on this edition of the Strategy Show?
Keep an eye on SuperDraft overlay. I mean, there are so many sports going on right now that SuperDraft may have overshot what they anticipated for people and their interest in NASCAR today. So keep an eye on that before lock. You may be able to just squeeze in a few entries and take advantage of some potential overlay there.
And, of course, be sure to give Phil a follow on Twitter at RaceSheets. Of course, if you ever have any questions, comments, great way to hit him up there. Also, if you're a premium member, hit him up in the Slack channel as well, as we'll get right back to you there. So that is going to wrap it up for the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show for today's Firekeepers Casino 400.